Welcome to the Bigger Yard. I'm Marvin Cotton Jr. This is my show. I'd like to give a big shout out to Lavish T. Williams for loaning me his studio for the day. I called him at the last minute. I said, brother, I need you. I'm having some issues with the studio that I normally record in. The brother, he didn't waste no time. He jumped straight in, got me right in here, got me right set up. And I must admit, hey, Lavish, this studio is great, man. You got the latest of everything in here. So big shout out to Lavish T. Williams, running for Detroit Police Commissioner. Check him out. Absolutely. Welcome to the Bigger Yard. This is where you get the bigger view, the bigger perspective. This show is for those that would like to be more informed or just to get a different perspective about things. Our guest today is somebody very special, somebody very dear to the city of Detroit, politician, our brother Anthony Adams. Give him a round of applause, please. So, a lot of people in Detroit have been seeing you go around. Yeah. They've been seeing you heavily involved at events. I go to events. I'm at 3, 4, 5 events a week sometimes, and I always see you at the events. I always see you everywhere.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me in the Bigger Yard, and also shout out to Brother Lavish. You know, it's a lifestyle. You just always have to remember that's what this is really all about. Very dynamic young man doing great things in the community, and I certainly commend you, having met you and talked with you, and how we can really connect today and talk about things that we really need to talk about in Detroit, getting our minds right so that we can win this election, because people need to understand the momentum is with us. And so I know we're going to get into that. Thank you for having me, and let's chop it up.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. And I reached out to you, and you responded immediately. I'm a right now type of guy. So when I'm trying to make something happen, I love when people are right there. The city of Detroit.
Yes.
Very near and dear to me. I was born and raised in the city of Detroit. I've always stayed up on what's going on in politics. What are some of the things that some of your contributions to the city that you really hold dear?
Well, I think I have a long history of public service in the city of Detroit. There would be only one correction I would make about your introduction. I'm not a politician. I'm actually a statesman. That's what I pride myself on, being in service to the people who live in our community and do great things in our community. So from a political perspective, I've been involved in so many different battles and so many different conflicts, whether it's talking about building single-family housing, for example, in the Victoria Park subdivision, the first single-family housing built in the city of Detroit since the Eisenhower administration back in the early 90s. Whether it's bringing commercial airline service to Detroit City Airport, which involved a local and international battle with the Canadians in the city of Warren, making that a reality in our city. Whether it's fighting emergency management, by being on the front line of changing the law. They changed the law so bad that they took all the damn power away from the school district. But we led the fight because it was very important to restore the level of democracy to what we need in our city. The people need to understand that we can control and have to control ourselves and our lives, and especially the lives of our children, because we see what we got from years of emergency management, which totally destroyed the value of education in the city of Detroit. Now we're seeing the impact of that by people not necessarily being as informed that they need to be in order to be up on the issues.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I've noticed recently that there's been some negative ads.
Oh yeah.
People have taken some indirect and some shots at you.
Shots. Shotgun blast.
I know a little something about that. As you know, I was wrongfully convicted, and I served 20 years in prison for a crime that I didn't commit. Right. And before we was on air, you asked me. You said, you're always so positive. Right. I run into you out, and I've seen you out places, and you're always so positive. And one of the things I share with you is, if you focus on the negative, you will never make it to your goal.
Oh yeah.
I was striving for freedom.
Right.
So I couldn't focus on all of the negative things that people were trying to associate my name with.
Right.
How do you stay focused on the campaign?
Well, I know who I am, and I know what I represent and what I stand for. And when people look at my record, I can't get caught up in other people's negativity, because I'm trying to do something to bring about awareness in the people in the community. And so I knew when I engaged in this battle that it was going to be a lot of negativity thrown at me, because they're trying to maintain control and power over our economic system. And when you challenge them in what they know and what they're trying to do to us, then they have to come negative because they're continuously trying to beat us down psychologically, weaken our community and weaken our minds. But we have to be strong in our resolution. We can't get caught up in what they talk about, and people cannot be misled by the millions of dollars of dark money packed. Make no mistakes about it. There are billions of dollars on the table to be spent. They're holding the bag right now, and they're trying to continue to do that because they don't want to spend the money in the manner that it needs to be spent. And so I'm going to be a voice to challenge the power structure because it needs to be challenged because what they're doing to the people in our community is a sin and a shame.
Wow. Thank you. There's a lot of ways to serve the people. You know, myself, I do motivational speaking. I go to events. I try to figure out ways that I can be a better service to the people in the community. One of our guests that'll be on a little bit later, Brother Zeke, he be out in the community,
like great work in the community.
Absolutely, boots on the ground. This is the way he served. He get the youth and those that are disconnected from what we're talking about involved.
And that disconnection, you know, is systemic or endemic of major issues in our community. Whether we start with the lack of trust of one another, the lack of respect that we need to have for one another, the fact that our communities have been fractured so bad, the fact that our relationship, black men, black women, all these relationships have been fractured, and it's been a systematic approach to really denigrate us. And so people getting out in the field, doing the hard work, the heavy lifting. You know, it's easy for people to sit in the office and talk about change, but it takes a strong person to get on the ground to do what's necessary to reach the people that we need to reach. When I ran this campaign, what I've been talking about is people who've been disaffected, people who are apathetic, people who've lost hope in our community. They have no one to look to that provides them at that political level with the level of guidance and the level of assurance that we can do great things in our own city with ourselves. And so when you look at ourselves politically, what do we have? I find it ironic that they would be talking about black voting districts. When hell, you look in the city of Detroit, we have a Palestinian congresswoman, we have a Chinese American state senator, we have an East Asian state rep, we have an Italian American superintendent, and we have a white mayor in our own community. So when they talk about black politics matter, I'm saying obviously it's not mattering because when you look at who's actually representing us in our own community, it's not us. And so part of the negativity is going to be about changing the construct of how people think and feel about themselves. And you just got to take the slings and arrows because the people need to see someone who's prepared to fight for them.
Wow. You actually kind of went off into my next question because I was going to ask you, why mayor? Like, there's many ways to serve. Like I said, I named a few. You have community activism and advocacy work, which I do. You have nonprofit work. You also have many different levels of government. Why mayor?
Because that's where the power is. You know, there was a phrase about a guy who was a bank robber and asking why he robbed banks. He said that's where the money is. The power emanates in the mayor's office. We have a strong mayor form of government, and he controls the entire spectrum of what we have to deal with. And so when you receive more than $1 billion in additional federal funding, you determine where that goes, irrespective of what the community needs, because if they were listening to the people in the community, how they're spending that money, they would spend it in that manner. We have to go to the seat of power to be in the fulcrum point of what happens from a geopolitical perspective, how we engage the legislature, how we engage ourselves in the global economy, and how we engage the people in our community. And by being the mayor, you stand at the forefront of being able to advocate for policies that our people need to see. And they need to see that leadership. We need to understand that we empower within ourselves. And part of what we've lost over the years is that we've kind of lost a perspective of how we feel about our own selves, and we got to change that mindset, or else we're continuously going to be in a downward spiral of not being progressive in our own community.
Wow, thank you. What are some of the things that you will focus on as mayor?
Right. So I got a long list because the list of issues of what we have to address is one. The main thing I've been talking about is really two major points. We're not going to be a great city unless we actually address the issue of crime. Crime is a byproduct of poverty, bad education, institutional racism, which continues to this day to impact black people in our own community. The other is actually the issue of housing and stabilization in our community. How do we go about doing that? Because when you look at how they spent our money over the last 8 years, it's been a systematic plan to not invest in neighborhoods where we need to be invested, neighborhoods where we have high crime, and neighborhoods where we have bad housing. There was recently a release, a study by the University of Michigan that says that we have more than 90,000 structures in the city of Detroit that are substandard that people are continuing to live in. And when you look at the impact of the mortgage, of the tax foreclosure crisis, which wiped out generational wealth and equity in black folks that own their home for 40, 50 years, and you have more than 40,000 people on the list currently today that stand at risk of losing their houses as a result of tax foreclosure, but people aren't speaking to that issue because it's not important to them. But we know people that have lost their houses. We know people that are now renting their home from some foreign investor who's coming in and bought it at tax foreclosure. How do we begin to change that much more progressively and restore ownership and power in our own community? There's a reason why we only own 47% of the houses in the city of Detroit. More people rent rather than own. And these are the kind of paradigm shifts that we need to engage in if we're really going to transform and empower the people in our community. As it relates to crime, I've been very aggressive in saying, look, we got to be much more interventional in our strategy. We cannot police our way out of crime. If that was the case, we spent more than $3 billion over the last 8 years fighting crime in Detroit, and we still have high crime levels. We had more than 800 children shot and murdered in the streets of the city of Detroit. We had a couple hit with a child in the car. We've had more homicides than we can shake a stick at. Sexual assaults, human trafficking. Every issue that we have, there is a plan of action on how to address it. So let's address the issue of crime head on. We have to engage the people who are committing the crimes. We can't wait to arrest them. We have to go out and speak with them and say, hey, look, how can I give you a platform and give you a way to move your life forward? I call it my Get Your Shit Together plan, which is the day of general amnesty, sort of rape, robbery, and murder. You come in, you sit down with the prosecutor, you sit down with the judge, you sit down with the expungement attorney, you sit down with the social worker, you sit down with the gang intervention specialist, you sit down with the people that you need in order to move your life forward. Because if fighting crime was the solution, we wouldn't have it. And so we have to try something radically different in engaging people in an interventional strategy much more aggressively to lay out a pathway to productive citizenship. We also have to address the issue of education in our community because we cannot have a world-class city if we don't have world-class schools. And part of the problem with our crime issue is that the people who were educated were not really educated. They were just passed along social promotions and not given the requisite skills in order to survive in a modern economy. It's amazing to me that jobs are being, quote, brought into the city of Detroit, but the people who live here don't qualify for those jobs. So how do we change that? How do we provide the opportunity, the skill, and the training necessary to make that work?
It sounds like you've done this a time ago. now, I did 20 years in prison.
Right.
One of the things that stuck out to me the most when I got out of prison was the condition of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's a drastic change.
Man.
They wasn't in the best condition. I got locked up in 2001.
All right. Who was your prosecutor?
Mike Duggan was the prosecutor.
I thought so. Guy incarcerated more African American men probably than any prosecutor in the history of Wayne County. But that's just a historical note.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know that Mike Duggan was actually the prosecutor.
Oh yeah, they should know that because when you're a prosecutor, that really shapes your mindset on what you really think about people, especially when you're a white guy locking up black people, and then we find out there were wrongful convictions because things were not done properly. There were not the appropriate checks and balances in place to make sure that people weren't wrongfully accused and then convicted because there's a process there, the police, the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury. And in all aspects of that life, he has a history of failing the people in the community. And that's the irony of what I see so amazing to me is that here you had a guy, they talk about Black Lives Matter, but in the first Black Lives Matter lawsuit or case in Detroit, which was Malice Green, where two cops savagely beat a man to death with those flashlights. Here was a guy who said, you know what, Mr. Medical Examiner, you need to call that death by drugs. But it wasn't. It was an actual murder. Lawsuit filed, money spent to deal with that issue. And people don't remember these things because they conveniently have allowing them to rewrite history and to rewrite themselves and what they don't like about it and why they go negative is because I remind people of these things. Let's look at his history. I call him, he's like the locust. Everywhere he goes, things are taken away. You look at Wayne County, left broke. You look at the prosecutor's office, black men are wrongfully incarcerated and convicted. You look at DMC, left a nice hospital system and made his millions, and now it's a shell of itself. Everywhere he's been, there have been things that have gone wrong, and people need to understand that because the same thing is going to happen in the city of Detroit if we don't change the leadership of our community.
For the record, I invited Mike Duggan here. I haven't received a response yet, but I don't know if I get it in enough time before the show is over with. But I did extend the invitation.
Right. But he's not going to come because part of his philosophy, his approach, is that I have to minimize who you are as an individual. And the minimization strategy is we understand that because they always try to minimize us in our own being. They try to minimize us in our educational achievement. They try to minimize us in our accomplishments. And the more you try to minimize someone, the less people may think of them. But the truth and the strength is that we have to continue to think better of ourselves than what they would try to impose on us from a psychological perspective. And that's the dangerous thing about this race. That when I talk with people, they say, you're actually showing people that you don't have to be afraid. You can talk up on the issue. You can talk about how we're being treated wrong. And I'm not considering myself, sort of the rah, social activist type guy. I've done a lot of social activist things. But this battle was so important for people to understand that this is our city. We control what goes on here. We pay the taxes in our own community. We should be directing the resources. Black contractors should be playing a much larger role in what's going on. But they try to keep telling us with the shiny object, man, downtown's nice. Yeah, it look good. But most of the people who live in the city of Detroit can't afford to go to the Foundation Hotel and buy a $600 bottle of wine and have a $500 dinner when you're only making $28,000 a year in income.